I'm Maureen Neihart, and I am a clinical child psychologist who's been working with gifted children and their families for more than 30 years. I was formerly a teacher, and then I went into clinical practice for a long while, and now I'm an associate professor at the National Institute of Education in Singapore, where I train teachers and psychologists. We developed a set of profiles of gifted children, and we recently revised that back in 2010. So we used a research-based approach to propose a typology, if you will, of 6 profiles of gifted children. Before I explain those 6, I just want to mention that what we are not saying is that there are strictly defined types of gifted children. Really, every gifted child is unique. And we want to be careful about labeling or creating sort of fixed expectations about gifted children. But the reason that we started with the profiles back in the 80s was because we saw that people did have kind of a fixed idea about what gifted children were like, and we wanted to raise awareness that there are many different kinds of gifted children. So the 6 that we proposed included a successful gifted child, and we believe that most children who are formally identified for gifted programming are probably these successful types because teachers tend to like them and they tend to be so obvious that they have exceptional ability, they do well in school, they're reasonably confident with pretty good self-esteem. Generally, at least they look that way. They're achieving in school. And the type 2s are more the creative gifted child who may be succeeding in school but may not be achieving in school also. And they may not have such high self-esteem because oftentimes, depending on the school environment, they can be a mismatch between the needs of the child to explore, to question, to challenge, to think outside the box, and a school environment that sometimes really favors conformity. Then the type 3s, we call them the underground gifted children. And these are kids who experience some tension between their need to belong. They really want to belong to a particular group, maybe a peer group, an ethnic group, a socioeconomic group, and I'll have a need to achieve. And in some contexts, in some cultures, not all, there is a lot of pressure for particularly younger adolescents to make a choice to deny their needs for achievement, perhaps, in order to belong to a group. So let me give you an example. Where you see this sometimes is with kids who are from environments of poverty, perhaps, or lower socioeconomic conditions, where there may not be a lot of support for high levels of achievement, or for, say, going to college, or to be on the honor roll, or to be the best in their school. And so they begin to feel some peer pressure to step away or avoid some of these activities, such as being enrolled in an advanced course, in order to belong to another group. What's particularly tough for some kids, I think, is to cross class boundaries, because if you have to cross class boundaries, say from going from a working class family to going to college and then eventually pursuing a job that is going to take you into middle class or upper middle class kinds of environments, sometimes for some families it feels like a rejection or a betrayal, and there may actually be pressure to not do that. Who do you think you are? You think you're better than us, that you need to go to none of us went to university, why do you need to go to university? That kind of thing. So that's the type 3, the underground, who feel this tension and have trouble resolving it. Then the type 4s are a very small subset of gifted children. And these are kids who are at risk. They're at risk for dropping out of school, for drug abuse perhaps, for criminality, for serious psychiatric problems. These kids are angry often with the school system. They have not had their needs met, or they're not well matched. They need structure, they need professional help. It's a very small percentage of gifted children, but I think there's commonly such a notion that gifted kids are going to do fine on their own, that if people see a child who's really in trouble, they may not think about them as gifted. And we need to remember that some kids who are in trouble, or even dropouts, can be gifted. And then we have the type 5s. These are the twice exceptional kids who have some kind of a learning disability or learning challenge. Might be attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, might be autism. They might have an emotional problem, but they're also gifted. So they're exceptional in two different ways. And these kids have one heck of a time getting appropriate services, and understandably so. It's difficult to meet the needs that they have. They're also at higher risk for social difficulties and for emotional adjustment problems because it's so difficult to get a good match for them in terms of curriculum and peer support. And then finally we have the type 6s. And these are kind of, we think, the goal of programming and support, the autonomous gifted child, an independent learner, one who is able to advocate for themselves. They're similar to the type 1s in that they're successful, but we think that the type 1s tend to be pretty teacher dependent. They'll do what they're assigned, they want to do well on the test, but they're really not taking any risks. They're not pursuing their own passions, maybe. The type 6s have really figured out what's important to them and what they're good at and what they want to do with their lives, or at least what they want to explore for a while. And they're able to independently, I'm not saying without any support, of course, but they're not teacher dependent. In fact, some of them might make the choice to not do as well as they could in school in order to save time for something that's an extracurricular kind of passion of theirs. So that briefly is the summary of the 6 profiles of the gifted that George Betts and I have recently revised. Yeah, we've just finished the revision, a second edition of a text that's called The Social and Emotional Development of Gifted Children, What Do We Know? That was a really meaningful project to work on. We had a great team of 30 authors and 30 reviewers and 2 other editors, Stephen Pfeiffer and Tracy Cross and myself. And the aim of that book is to summarize as concisely as we can the empirical literature. What do we know from the educational and psychological science about the social emotional development of gifted children? So each chapter, there are I think 21 chapters in the book. Each chapter is only 10 to 12 pages, so it's easy read. We wrote it in a easily accessible style so that parents could read it, teachers can read it, academics can read it, so people can use it as a reference, or they can use it to inform themselves for practice very quickly if they want. And one of the things we emphasized in this revision is the importance of culture and context. Because although we give a lot of lip service to culture and differences, particularly in America, we talk about that a lot. But I think there's still a level that we could go much further than that. And what we are growing in our understanding, not just in gifted education, but in all fields, is that culture and context makes a big difference. And processes, psychological processes that we once thought were universal across people, we're increasingly learning are not so universal. They really do vary some across culture and different conditions. So I'm pleased with that revision that we made in the book. There's 4 sections in the book. One of the new sections that we added was a section on the psychological science of talent development and what we can learn from the field of expertise and coaching in terms of how to prepare people psychologically for high performance, if you will. One of the things that I worked on in particular were the psychosocial factors that are associated with high performance. And there are at least 8 psychosocial skills, if you will. We say high achievement takes more than talent and hard work. You can be talented and you can work very hard, but if you're not psychologically prepared for the demands of high achievement, you're not going to persist long term. So there are mental and emotional skills that keep you sharp, keep you engaged, and support you in that motivation that's required to endure for a long while to really reach those high levels of achievement. So I won't go into all of them, but I'll mention a few of them. Emotion, for example, plays a very strong role in high performance, particularly anxiety and stress. I think we all are familiar with that. It's normal to be nervous, but you don't want to lose your nerve. So you really need to be able to manage your anxiety and keep yourself in a zone, an emotional zone, the mood for hard work, if you will. Rest and recovery routines. When you get to a level of deep commitment to a particular area of talent development, you have to be quite religious about your rest and recovery routines. If you look at elite performers in any domain, they are very disciplined about sleep, about rest, daily rest breaks, about weekly rest and even annual kinds of rest, and also recovery, that you need to recover after periods of high exertion or periods of working very hard. So those are just a few examples. One of the things we know about them is that they're not innate. You don't just have them, but they can be systematically trained. So one of the things I've wondered about for a few years is how come we're not systematically training? How come we don't start in kindergarten, for example, and teach kids how to manage their anxiety? It's very simple to learn to do. You just have to practice. Imagine what you could do with your life if you knew that when you're nervous, because you're always going to have times when you're nervous, but if you had confidence that you could manage your anxiety, what would you do with your life that you haven't already done? And it's very freeing and empowering when you have those kind of skills. Well, these are the factors that are associated with talent development. So we know that some of them are more relevant for early stages of talent development, and others are more relevant for later stages of talent development. To give you an example of something that changes, social supports is one of the psychosocial factors. So when children are very small and have an exceptional ability in some area, parents are really the primary social support. They're the ones who encourage the child. They make sure the child has opportunities to grow, to spend time in that activity. They're the ones who provide resources as they can. But as children move into more of a deep commitment, which depends on the domain of what you're interested in, sometimes that happens in early adolescence, sometimes it doesn't happen until young adulthood, but when they move into that level of deep commitment, they make a decision that this is something I think I want to do with my life, then parents become less important. There's still support, but mentors and experts become more important as a social support. There are differences across domains. It's very different to have a child who's a very talented writer, for example, than a child who's a very talented violinist. So I don't think I'm trying to think of what I could say that might be universal, except perhaps maybe to do a little bit of reading. There are some resources available, and particularly within your domain. For some domains, like music or sport, there are lots of resources available. But if you have a very talented young writer on your hands, there's fewer resources in that regard. I did write a book that was published in 2008 called Peak Performance for Smart Kids, that is for parents, that shares with them how to help their children develop these psychosocial skills. So that might be useful if you've got a child, say, who is still in school, who's very talented and seems to be on a trajectory for high performance, then I think that book might give them some ideas of ways that they could be more targeted in their parenting and support that child. Well, gifted children are like all children. They respond very well to positive support, to love, to permission to explore their passions, unconditional regard. All the things that are true about good parenting are true for gifted children. I think the thing maybe I would say to parents of gifted children in particular is that they're really going to need advocacy. Schools are often not going to get it. And so the parents are the ones who are going to have to stand in the gap and learn to advocate appropriately but assertively for their children. The giftedness is really about ability, and we know that you can develop your abilities, both mental abilities, emotional abilities, your physical abilities. Any ability can be developed. So they can be developed systematically, and it's a matter of understanding kind of where you're at and where you want to be, and then working, taking small steps, applying the psychological science or the educational research to get there, to get where you want to be.